All right, we had a real good episode today with Dr. Josh Healy. He's a chiropractor, been doing it for 14 years. He's worked on me for a number of years through a lot of aches and pains and herniated discs. Really intelligent guy, cares a lot about working with athletes, works mostly with athletes, student athletes. Very, very knowledgeable. Had a great time, fun stories. So hopefully you'll learn some things here too. So enjoy. All right, well, welcome back to the show, everybody. We're back at with Athlete Builder today. We're in the library. You have me, your host, of course, Jim Beebe. I got my teammate Lucas Loring here online, and then today we have Dr. Josh Healy, chiropractor for the last 14 years, deals with a lot of athletes and also the average Joes, aches and pains. But we had him on the podcast because a number of people in my gym and myself included have been working with him for years, helping us right the ship physically so we can move correctly and have a better shot at being better at what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. So today, Josh Healy is with us. Josh,
Thanks for having me, Jim.
Thanks for coming on. We appreciate you taking the time and all the insights and the help over the years. I really wouldn't be able to do a lot of things I wanted to do in my amateur level, powerlifting and strongman, nothing to really brag about, but what I was trying to do, it really wouldn't have happened without you and Sarah over at MyoFit and a few others keeping me on track. So, hey, man, thank you. Right off the bat, appreciate it.
Well, thank you for saying that. It means a lot.
So just walk me through. I know you played rugby, basketball, some other sports growing up. Walk me through your athletic, amateur career, and then how you decided to get into what you do now with chiropractic work, and then take us just briefly through. I know you've been running your own show for the last 14 years, so just give everybody a little background on what you've been all about.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I was your standard rec ball kid. I grew up in all the rec baseball, rec basketball, played the classic all-stars. Travel leagues weren't a thing yet when I was a kid. But I did good enough to get recognized by a few college scouts. Got invited to, in Indiana, what was called the North-South game as a 13-year-old in baseball, and got an opportunity to go to a college scout event and got some looks, but nothing too major. Sports-wise, I tried out for my freshman year at an NAIA school. Made the first cut in baseball, and then decided it wasn't for me, and then headed over to Purdue where I started playing rugby in college. So played basketball through high school, was homeschooled in high school, and so I played on more of a travel homeschool team. We played a lot of Christian schools, Division I schools here in Indiana. So I wouldn't say I was a super high-level athlete, but I certainly enjoyed my athletic time as a youth. So,
and then so you got your undergrad at Purdue, and you said you played rugby there as well, right?
I did.
So that's a club sport, and I think it still is, right?
Yes.
You still got to go out.
I was very average to under average size rugby player at Purdue.
Gotcha. So I played a club sport at Purdue too, which was minor racquetball. I did it for a while, but I know like even the club teams, at least on the rugby side, they're playing legit teams like Wisconsin, BG out of Ohio. There's a number of legit schools that you still have to go up against, even though it's a club sport. Those guys, someone will play pro overseas.
Oh yeah, my captain was 6'7", probably 280, 290. I mean, it was no joke. I got my first concussion playing rugby, that's for sure.
And so to be clear, you're playing the 15s, not the 7s, which is a whole different rugby league.
Right.
So what number were you?
What number was I? Oh, man.
So like the first 9 are the bigger guys, except for the number 2, the hooker. So the other 8 are all considered the props. They're the forwards.
I was always in the back. I was the props.
So,
man, what number was I?
So 10 through 15.
I was 22 in high school. I was 18 in baseball. It was a higher number. It was high teens.
So 10 through...
It was 17 or 18, I think so.
10 through 15 are all the backs and the wing backs, and then 17, 18 will come in and replace them. But they're still... The guys running with the ball, not the bigger ones up front. So it gives everybody more of a contact.
That was me. I was not the guy up front.
I'm not the guy up front. Got it. And then you, after Purdue, where'd you go next?
I graduated at Purdue with my engineering degree, and then I headed to National University of Health Sciences in Chicago for my chiropractic education.
Gotcha. And then
Yeah, I graduated there in 2009.
so 14 years later is where we're at today. So you've been a chiropractor the whole time and been running
Yep.
your own practice.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Through all the highs and lows that brings, right?
Well, I run my own business as well, and there's lots of highs and there's lots of lows and everything in the middle,
Absolutely.
just like any other profession. You just keep at it and try to get better in what you can.
Just keep grinding.
Keep grinding. That's right.
Absolutely.
Talk to me a little.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to go into my next segment of how I became a chiropractor, but if you had something else.
I don't. Let's hear it.
Okay. Story I've told a lot. There's generally, I always joke, there's two type of chiropractors. There's the conversion stories, and there's the jocks that thought it would be easy to become a doctor by becoming a chiropractor. And so I'm a conversion story. So
how'd you get converted?
So at the age of 14, this is back in like the Mighty Ducks days. So, street hockey was all the rage. And, rollerblades, knuckle pucks, all that kind of stuff. And so I had played street hockey for like 4 hours. And then I went and had a 3-hour basketball practice. And the next day I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. My back hurt so bad. My low back. And so a journey of 12 weeks took me to PTs, MDs, and even one surgeon to try to figure out what was going on. They wanted to brace me. One guy even recommended surgery. My parents were like, he's 14 years old. You're going to have surgery on a 14-year-old. And out of pure desperation, my parents tell the story, out of pure desperation, we went to a local chiropractor up in Avon and took one x-ray, gave me an exam, and knew exactly what the problem was. And at that point, it took me 45 minutes to get out of bed in the morning. And in 4 weeks, I was back playing basketball.
There you have it. Right.
And I was just like, that's cool.
It is, right? And it's not all pills and needles and drugs. It's manipulating your body so it can heal on its own.
He set up a series of adjustments, exercises, stretches, and before I knew it, I was pain-free like it never happened.
So just a testimonial in 22, I had my last major back injury. I was coming off a foot injury, and I had broken my foot preparing for a contest in January was it 20? Of 20. It was 20, so it was COVID, right? So I'm getting ready for a contest in January, and I break my foot from a stress fracture. And same time, my son breaks his wrist playing soccer when he landed on it. He's out of his cast in 3 weeks. I'm in a walking boot, 16 weeks. And I asked the doc, I go, hey, doc, 3 weeks versus 16. He goes, yeah, you're just older. You're not going to heal the same. Plus you're walking on it, but still you're not, it's 16, you're just older. It's not going to happen. So from there, I get out of the boot and I don't realize, I don't pay attention. Right? It doesn't feel like anything's really that different once I'm out of the boot, but I don't realize that your whole gait has been impacted so much that you're not even aware. Your body will just compensate because your body always compensates. So you think you're moving correctly, but you're really not. So I start training again, and a few weeks go by, then a month go by, and the second month goes by, and I'm like, all right, so I'm kind of working my way back, and I'm back to using some of the similar weights, and I'm squatting on a speed day, and I come down on my 10th set, and I'm like, I come up, you can just feel it. You just know that something kind of popped out. And I was like, oh man, I just finished the set. And I'm like, oh man, I'm done. I'm going home. That night, I remember it took me 30 minutes to get out of the bed, go to the bathroom, and then come back. It was literally roll off the sides very slowly and gingerly. You're kneeling on the floor, and you prop your body up so you can actually try to stand. And that was an 8 to 10 minute process. Then you got to walk to the bathroom. Then you got to walk back and then roll yourself back into bed. And I'm like, oh, this is really pretty bad. Haven't been hurt like this in a long time. So go to a regular doctor because you have to see them first before they send you the specialist, and they send you the back doctor, and they're like, hey, you need to see a surgeon. So go see the surgeon. They're like, yep, surgery right away. They're going to do this. You have this stenosis. So in your spine, the spine was getting thicker and thicker from lifting, and it's kind of crunching down on the nerve. and said they need to go in there and kind of rotor-rooter that out and then create some alleviation so the discs can go back in. I'm like, really? So I'm already staring at surgery? And I already been seeing you for years. I'm like, well, I still need to see my chiropractor, see what he says. And you're like, hey, I can fix this. Do a lot of Stuart McGill stuff, and a few weeks go by, and I'm back to moving, right? And then I'm moving correctly.
Right.
So that was my real eye-opening. I knew that it was important. I'd been doing it all along for adjustments because I have aches and pains or I want to move better. But that was a real moment where, like, I'm staring at surgery, and then you get me moving correctly and pain-free. So I was like, oh, man, this is my guy forever now, because I just witnessed tremendous pain and then tremendous no pain, right? So that was my like conversion story along with you, Doc. It was absolutely impactful.
Well, thanks, man. I never heard that whole story.
That's how it went. I remember you telling me you're a big Stuart McGill guy. So for those that don't know, what does that mean?
What is the what?
What does that mean, being a Stuart McGill guy?
Okay. Well, Stuart McGill, for those that don't know, is not a physician. He's actually a PhD in spine biomechanics. And he was a professor at the University of Waterloo, which is up in Canada, for 30 years. And with my engineering background, there was some philosophies in chiropractic school that I never really like. This doesn't make a lot of sense engineering wise. It doesn't make a lot of sense mechanically. And so even though I was learning all my chiropractic stuff and my philosophies, I was always looking for other
evidence.
Let's call them truths when it came to spine issues.
Sure.
And I came across some guys like Craig Liebenson and Greg Cook. And then I ran into Stuart McGill. And everything he said, everything he wrote, every class I attended was purely based in engineering, mechanics, levers, loads, stresses on tissues, and it clicked in my mind. And so after, now that he is the guru of low back pain, and anyone at any level of fitness has heard of Stuart McGill, he's basically the back mechanic. He's the back mechanic to CEOs, to athletes all over the world, to multiple Olympic teams. I mean, he is just the guy in low back pain.
And that's even the title of one of his books, right? The Back Mechanic.
It is his most recent book with Brian Carroll, Low Back Mechanic.
So then he and Brian also wrote the Gift of Injury.
Yes.
Right. So Brian Carroll is a elite, world-class level power lifter, and he was squatting over 1,200. And he obliterated his one of his
sacrum.
Right.
Yeah, he got a stress fracture in his sacrum from deadlifting and squatting, which is hard to do.
Right, all that pressure, and it took Stuart's ability to rehab him and get him back, and then he was actually able to get back on the platform, and then have a higher total. He added to his squat. He was stronger afterwards.
Yeah.
And the gift of injury was that he didn't realize all the things he was doing incorrectly. So that injury had to hold him back until he went back and built the knowledge of what he was doing incorrectly so he could fix that biomechanically and then go back and evolve further and farther. And that's how he's able to do that. And he did that, hand in hand with Stuart McGill. So the Gift of Injury, another book of his, that's fantastic.
Yeah, agree completely. I have that one as well. I believe I have that one signed. So
okay.
But I got to meet Brian Carroll and Stu at an event once. So obviously I got some pictures.
Sure. There's the Stuart McGill Big Three.
Yes.
You want to let everybody know what those are?
Sure. So there's all kind of low back exercises, right? You Google low back exercises and you'll get hit with 500 hits. So what Stuart McGill tried to do is he tried to come up with the idea of biggest gain for your buck, meaning how much stability can you gain with the least amount of force on your spine when it comes to exercises. And so the three that he didn't develop, these already existed, but he found that they were the best. The three are the first one being the side bridge or the side plank, beginning stages of the bird dog, which is the one on all fours where you do a contralateral arm leg extension.
Opposite arm, opposite leg, yep.
opposite arm on opposite leg. And the third one, and he maybe, I don't know if he developed this third one, but he modified it heavily, is a laying on your back style curl up, where you hit he was looking for something 365 degrees around the spine. And so you have the lateral aspects, the obliques and things like that, to the side planks. You have the posterior chain through the bird dogs, and you have that anterior chain through what he calls the curl up or the modified curl up, which targets your rectus muscles and some of your obliques without bending your spine and creating further injury mechanisms. So those are his big three: the side plank, side bridge, similar but different, the bird dog, and then the modified curl up.
And so the curl up, you're lying on your back, and you can bring your feet towards your butt, or you can have them straight. But then you essentially lift your scaps and your upper back off the deck, keeping your low back on it, and as if there's like a string pulling your chest towards the ceiling, and you sit there and you hold that pose, and you build up your core stability that way.
Right. That's exactly how he phrases it. It's like someone's pulling a string through your sternum.
Gotcha.
Generally you put your hands in your low back so you don't flatten out the back, since that's the main injury mechanism for discs.
Gotcha.
So.
Yep. And those three big things were big movers for me. So the big ROI on return on investment.
That's a good term for it. The most ROI low back exercises.
Yeah. So with your practice of seeing so many different kinds of ailments or injuries, sure, there's the moms and pops from the sitting and or being out of shape, but you also work with younger athletes too, including my own kids. What sort of trends are you seeing in high school and college kids?
Gotcha.
That brings those kids in to see you, or or still not see you even, but they still have the same issues. They're not getting addressed.
Right. America's always been, bigger, better, man. Get big, get jacked, lift heavier weights, sacrifice everything to get the weight off the ground.
Thank goodness.
It's been that way for, 60 years, and it's been that way since I've been in practice. And it almost doesn't matter what evidence you bring these people, whether they're trainers or coaches or the athletes themselves. It's almost like whatever they hear first, they do. And then it's the gift of injury that makes them think differently.
Yes.
So, when I would say the biggest thing I see in young athletes is their inability to know where their hips are.
Talk more about that.
And they do everything through their back.
Yeah.
Back and knees.
Right.
And they have very little idea of how to utilize their hips and flexion extension cycles, rotational forces, all those kinds of things.
So rotational, baseball, tennis, golf, right? But moving laterally or just simply getting off the ground, you'll see a lot of rounded backs, people not able to use their legs and their hips to get off the ground. And they do this big, exacerbated good morning movement and make their low back do everything. And what I hear is, man, I got a weak low back. I'm like, no, it's not that. It's that you make your low back do everything else around it is weak. And if you could fix that, then you wouldn't quit picking on your low back so much. Make your glutes and hamstrings stronger, make your upper back stronger to help because your low back has to compensate.
And a lot of the verbiage I use comes from Stuart McGilby. He talks a lot about the paperclip. He's like, it doesn't matter how thick you make the paperclip. You keep bending it back and forth through multiple cycles and speeds and loads, it's going to break.
Just a matter of time.
The spine's a weight-bearing structure. That is its initial purpose. It can move, but it's not a ball and socket joint like your hips and shoulders are designed to bear load and move.
Gotcha.
Your low back is designed to bear load and stay stable. And so when you move it under load, you get in trouble.
Gotcha. And then so with student athletes, even males versus females, you'll see a difference in obviously their anatomical structure. And then consequently, you'll see a difference in repetitive use injuries. So differences you'll see in males and females. What are things you see as a trend with athletes?
Well, I would even say more interesting than males and females is the difference in hip structure based on their genealogy and their anthropology. And so what I mean by that is, guys like you and I are, our Celtic, Irish, German backgrounds. I assume you're Celtic Irish,
Right. Yeah.
just given your build
Right.
and what I know about you.
English. Yeah.
Yeah. We have much flatter hip angles. The hip is a ball and socket joint as opposed to a steeper hip angle like this. And you see the steeper hip angles in your Eastern Europeans, your Polish, your Czechs, your Russians, things of that nature, which is why they oftentimes dominate a lot of the powerlifting type things, because they have that greater hip mobility.
Gotcha.
And so that's the thing I see more often, is that anatomy in a perfect world should be guiding what these young athletes are doing lifting wise. And I would say the biggest thing that kills these kids' low backs is this idea of needing to squat to parallel or below parallel in order to, quote, activate the glutes more, not understanding their hip anatomy, and then they just end up trashing their low back. So
And if you combine their hip anatomy with the different lengths in their femurs.
Yes, absolutely.
So then someone that's super tall with long levers, them squatting below parallel is completely different than my wife, who's 5'2", and has that Polish background, and so that big curvature, so she can squat no problem that way, right?
Exactly. And with females, you get into some wider pelvises, greater Q angles, which is the angle between the hip and the internal knee. There's some evidence for that, which is why females tend to have more ACL tears, more medial meniscus issues. But that's been known for 70 years, so that's on most people's radar. But what is not on their radar is hip structure, and that, hey, maybe I don't want to take this athlete and squat him below parallel. Maybe he doesn't have that anatomical ability to do it. It's not that he's not weak. It's not that he's not
willing,
strong. It's just he can't anatomically do it.
Sure. And it's hard because you'll see strength coaches, especially at the high school level, they'll have, based on time constraints, they might have 50, 70, or 100 kids in a class doing APC trying to lift. And
exactly.
And the teacher is forced to, hey, here's our template, here's our blueprint. Everyone must do the same thing, and obviously, no, not everyone's the exact same. So it's a good guideline, but that's where the art meets the science of coaching. The science says this, but the art says, well, not exactly in this instance because this person isn't built to do that, right?
Well, and I have a great story about that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I was treating. At one point, I was pretty involved with our local high school athletic program before the local hospital kicked me out. And I had this reoccurring injury with about 40% of the female volleyball team had this low back injury, same exact injury. And after I did my examination, I asked them to bring in a couple friends. I wouldn't charge them or anything like that. And the girls that were getting injured had the flatter, deeper hip sockets, and the girls that weren't getting injured had the steeper, more shallow hip angles. And so what this volleyball coach was doing is that he was having them squat butt to the ground, weight on their back, and then having them explode onto a box jump from that position with the weight on their back. And he was fracturing. He was getting spondy fractures in the low back on 40% of his girls. And it was the ones with the deeper hip sockets and flatter hip angles that were getting these injuries.
Gotcha.
And I wrote him letters. I did all kinds of things. And he basically told me to mind my own business. And he's not there anymore, so I don't mind talking about him. But
that's tough because you see something and you get stonewalled like that. But all you can do is keep trying to educate and push forward. And hopefully someone listens or someone doesn't. But that makes it tough. And it's hard on the kid because the kid ends up getting hurt, right?
Exactly.
The other thing,
I mean, one of these girls, she wants to actually be a chiropractor. She set all of our local high schools records and power and strength sports and track and field. I mean, she was just a powerhouse, and they kept injuring her because they didn't understand that her power was coming from her hips and shoulders, but she wasn't going to be a ballerina that she was going to touch her head to her toes.
Sure.
And they kept stretching her and doing all these things, and it was horrible.
Yeah. You don't know what you don't know, so it's not like they're not trying to do their best, but which is the case. But
exactly.
But clearly, they're making some mistakes. The other thing, being really strong in different positions, no one's really that powerful squatting from the bottom. Like, you can build up some strength from there, but your most powerful stance is when your butt's a little bit above parallel and you jump from there. No one's doing a broad jump or a box jump or trying to jump and grab the rim, squatting down as low as they can. Right?
Right.
They're more powerful, much higher up. And
Agreed.
I point that out because I was talking to one of my friends, Tyler Miller, who's a D1 thrower for Purdue, and he owns and operates Force Barbell here in Indiana. And I was just talking one day about just overall metrics and numbers, because those guys are big and strong and powerful. And I would ask him, from the floor, how much would you pick up? He goes, I was probably maybe a 450 to 500 deadlifter. And he's a big boy, he's like 6'4", 250, 265. He goes, well, Jim, all my power needs to be from above the knee. So we do a lot of snatching, a lot of cleaning, and, heavy deadlifts from above the knee. And he goes, well, from above the knee, I would pull 830, 840. That's where I need to be powerful at, not from the bottom. So I don't really need to be strong off the floor. Now,
Gotcha.
In high school or in junior high, you're trying to make well-rounded athletes, but when you're in college, that's much more sport specific. And for him, there's no need for him to squat all the way down. He need to be really, really powerful, barely above parallel and up. You can still get better squatting to parallel, but for him, most ROI was everything above that, and that's what he had time and energy systems to work on. So that's where he's focused his training, and he was super powerful where he needed to be.
Yeah, it's pretty smart individual. There's a lot of that kind of information coming out now about appropriate stretching, too, where stretching within your range of necessity, basically, and instead of trying to get the maximum end range that you can out of a joint, getting into the range that is necessary for what you need it to do. And so that's along the same lines. That's interesting.
So when you come across student athletes are having these issues, the next question is, now what? What do we do?
Now what
do we do? You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So usually I get a kid in who has an injury. So they're not coming to me for any type of weightlifting advice or performance advice. They've come in with an injury. And so almost immediately, every single time, it's, hey, you got a minimum of 2 weeks off. And then it's an argument with the parents and with the kid, because kids can't see into the future more than a couple days. So 2 weeks off their sport's always a big argument. And then we generally I start breaking them down from the floor up. Is their big toe extending 60 degrees? Are their ankles moving? Are their knees stable? That's a big issue with girls. If their knees are stable, are their hips moving appropriately? External and external rotation. Can they maintain lumbar stability under load? Are they a throwing or a striking athlete? So now we're looking at their shoulder blade function, their ability to extend and rotate through the upper back. So, it's a process. They want to get adjusted. They're coming to a chiropractor. So, they generally get their adjustment with me, and then they get about a minimum of 4 weeks of homework. Hey, this is what's wrong. This is why it's wrong. This is what I need you to change. And the more you do this, the quicker you'll get better. And after 2 weeks, we'll reassess. And if you can get back to your sport, we'll tell you.
Gotcha.
And that's just kind of how I've gone.
Getting the adjustment is not permanent. No, it's temporary. You're trying to get your body to do what you want it to do, but you have to guide it and get it to start doing it. So that's where the homework becomes critical.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
When John Stockton, famous Hall of Fame point guard for the Jazz, was being interviewed about his longevity all those years, and at his size, he's getting pushed around and banged around. He's going through picks and screens and everything else. And he's like, he would keep asking, what's one of your secrets? And one of the secrets is that it's more than just one thing. But his thing was, on game day, he was adjusted 4 times that day.
Is that right?
4 times that day.
I had never heard that.
So Tiger, the same deal. Tiger Woods, he was adjusted multiple times. So it's only it's only temporary until your body, sets it in there. So to your point about the homework, if you're given, an adjustment, and you're given this homework to do to help, let's say it's Stewart's big 3, and you do those for 10 minutes, well, that's a little bit more help. If you do it for 10 minutes before breakfast, lunch, and dinner, well, that's more help, right? Or if you see your trainer and they have you foam roll and they scrape you, but then you start doing some of the other things, you do the homework as well, then that's more help. So it's the athlete that's more relentless on their recovery that takes a 4-week rehab and gets it done in 3.5 weeks or a 3-week rehab. Or if they don't do the recovery, that 4-week rehab ends up being a 7-week rehab and another injury.
Right.
So that recovery ends up becoming a limiting factor. And at the higher levels, you have to take more and more of the steps to recover, because when you're competing, that's not to be healthy, that's to win. You're asking your body and your mind to do things that it's not wanting or built necessarily to do all the time.
Well, and it's hard to sell that to young athletes because it's hard to sell that to adults. It's hard to sell once the pain is gone does not mean you're recovered.
Sure.
And everyone wants to get out of pain, me included. I want to get out of pain as much as the next guy, but pain is always the first thing to go away. Most people don't realize that tissue remodeling is a minimum of 3 weeks. Then it's, stability remodeling. Then it could be anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks to stabilize a joint. And it might not hurt at all after that 10-day or 14-day mark. But when you throw it back into a chaotic environment like a sport, it's a hard sell to a 16-year-old.
Sure. And if you go through Trevor Moab's book, the title is simply, It Takes What It Takes, right? So whatever it took for you to bench 135, it's going to take more to bench 225. Whatever it took for you to run a 5.0 40 or a 4.8 40 is going to take more. Whatever it took you to recover, it's going to take more. And here's why people get upset. They believe that their effort in any of those endeavors, whether it's recovery, their grades, their strength, their position on their team, they put out X number of effort. And they believe it should be equated to X number of results. And they get upset when it's simply not. Well, what they fail to realize is that X amount of effort was an estimation. It was a guess. If I did this, I hope to be here, right? It turns out you were a little bit off. Your estimations on the things you need to get better at only got you to here. And it takes what it takes. So it turns out it might take this much more work to get here. And it's not necessarily this much more film study or this much more time with your team practicing. It might be in your case, this much more time recovering to get to here. You're not going to be able to break the math. It's still going to take what it takes. And that's where people are upset. They'll think, well, I did this, I deserve that. Well, no. The scoreboard says you are what you are. The scoreboard says that. So I'm sorry, but no. It takes more. And once you get your head wrapped around that, it goes, oh, well, I just made a bad estimation. It takes a little more. Okay. Then I'll just do that. That's the hard part. Yeah. That's the hard part when they have to reconcile those two differeces.
Right. My 14 years, I try to educate people, then I leave the decision in their hands. They're ultimately, their health's in their hands, even after they receive my advice or my care. So you do what you can for them.
Talk about, you said that even though the pain's gone, there's still some underlying issues. So my understanding with the symmetry of the joints, and I didn't recognize this after I came out of the boot injury. So if your left ankle is off, then your right knee has to compensate. And then if you're right, and then your left hip, and then your right shoulder. So your body, in its mind's eye, wants to be nice and straight and vertical, but it's more like an S curve a little bit as it's trying to compensate, because you're always off by a little bit if your hips are rotate or something like that.
Okay. So for, the vast majority of pain you're going to have is that first 3 to 5 days. That's your acute inflammatory stage. That's where all the swelling happens. Your body's throwing all the chemicals at it to start that healing process. And then most people don't understand that tissue repair is a process. So once the inflammation stage is gone, you go through a repair stage, then you go through a remodeling stage where the tissues are repaired, but then the body remodels it to try to achieve maximum tensile strength or compressive strength or something of that nature. So that alone can last, just the body's tissue repair cycle can last up to 6 to 8 weeks, minimally. And then, okay, so now that's healed. Great. All right. Now what's been happening in that time? All right, you've been in a boot, so now you're an inch leg length difference from your other leg.
At least.
So you've overloaded your opposite knee, like you said. You probably overloaded the opposite side pelvic joint. You've developed a little muscle hypertrophy because of that in the low back muscles. You've probably tilted one of your shoulders a little bit higher because of that. I mean, it's a what we call the kinetic chain up the body. One joint affects the next one, affects the next one, affects the next one. And so once you're out of the boot, once you're out of the cast, once you're allowed to start weight-bearing activities from a joint injury, you start to see how you move. How are you bearing weight? What are your movement patterns like? Take them through the primitive stuff, push, pull, squat, one leg things, what's holding up. And so that all takes time.
And that's where I made big mistakes. I didn't go through that nice little basic checklist of assessments to see if I'm good to go.
Yeah.
I went with, I feel okay. All right.
Yeah, pain's gone.
Yeah,
Let's
I'm
go.
feeling all right.
And when you're young, not to say you're old, Jim, but you're kind of old.
Yeah, look at the white beard.
When you're young and your tissues are nice and springy, and your discs are still well hydrated, and you bounce a little easier when you're 16 than when you're 45. You can get away with that stuff, and then you hit your late 20s and your 30s and your 40s, and
gotcha.
The body has a long memory.
Yep, and it still takes what it takes. So your workload is different, right?
Yep,
work's a little different. What are things that you are advocating that younger athletes or just athletes in general need to be doing to keep their spine lubed up and good to go so it can handle the load? Like, you're talking about volleyball players, they're in that arch and they'll come down on their feet, landing in that arch on their low back. Or you talk about the Q angles, so people have instability in their joints and their knees. We find them, a lot of young athletes are very, very quad dominant, and their hamstrings and glutes are weaker, creating that imbalance, opening them up to injury. So talk about the training that helps prevent the injuries, and then the training that helps push them forward so they can actually excel what they're trying to do.
Gotcha. So before I go with that, I would say one of the things, and this is why people hate me, even kids need a rest and recovery period. Mm-hmm. Okay? We have turned so many of our athletes, young athletes, into professional athletes at such a young age. I mean, I grew up watching the NBA. It was the guys who'd been in the league 10, 12 years that were getting Achilles tears, ACL issues, ankle problems. And now these kids are coming out of that with ACL tears in their second year. They're having surgery before they enter the NBA. I mean, these kids play one sport so much. And you've got a lot of these great surgeons like Dr. Andrews. You're starting to get some of these coaches now like Jim Harbaugh and some of these other guys going, go do something else in the off season. Play your sport, train. If you're a football player, go play some soccer, go play some basketball. If you're go do some ballet, go do some gymnastics. Let those joints that you're using constantly rest and recover. So you just stop beating on them all the time. That's the number one.
And then, you'll see, you mentioned that these kids are playing pro level sports, meaning whether it's travel baseball or travel soccer or softball, whatever, they're playing 8, 9, 10 months a year, right? And that's one thing if you're an adult and you're used to that volume, and you also have all the other things working. You have your trainers, you have your doctors nearby, and you've done all the lifting to help you prepare your body for that 10-month battle, because your body's getting damaged day after day after day. And those guys are doing all the lifting and all the training and all the nutrition. They're doing all the recovery things so their body can handle it, versus a 12-year-old, they're doing all that competing. And I know what I was doing at 12. Once I'm coming home, I'm eating a bunch of junk, staying up late as I can, and then going to bed, right? And then I'll probably skip breakfast on the way to school because I slept in as long as I could.
Well, and people don't realize most of these kids aren't skeletally mature until they're 23, 24, 25. And by skeletally mature, I mean completely closed growth plates. They have all the bone density that they're going to have. I mean, there's your freak of natures out there that are different. But I mean, it's just no one talked about Tommy John surgery when I was a kid,
Right.
Elbows, I remember the first time I saw an 8-year-old with a rotator cuff injury in my practice. It was my 3rd year of practice. And I was just like, how do you have a rotator cuff injury? Oh, I've been playing baseball since I was 5 all year long. And I was like, oh, well, that might be why.
Sure.
And so that kind of thing. So yes, volume is a huge, huge issue. And then I will echo, I forget his name. It's going to drive me nuts. But one guy, he talked about volume, but he also talked about how we have fine-tuned these sports. If you watch a basketball game from the 1980s and then watch a basketball game nowadays, the cuts are sharper, the moves. I mean, we have just fine-tuned these sports to get the most performance out of them, that not only is the volume high, but the intensity is so high on some of these kids too. They're jump training, they're speed training, they're constantly doing these things. So I don't even remember what your original question was, but what would you start doing? But I remember getting chewed out by a dad. His 15-year-old son was a varsity football player around here. He had 2 herniated discs in his back, couldn't straighten up. And I made the suggestion that he might not want to play this season. And I have never been chewed out harder in my life by a parent than that. And that really opened my eyes to the mindset of our culture when it comes to kids sports.
When I'm usually advocating, and I'm not saying it's a hybrid, but it's a little different. It's not that I'm saying you shouldn't play 10 months a year, right? Though
Sure.
you shouldn't. You should probably play a second sport. But if you're going to play 10 months a year, at least equip the person. Like if you're going to play 10 months, you're going to give the baseball kid a baseball mitt to catch. If you're going to make him play 10 months, during those 10 months, make him lift 3 days a week to build up the overall base so that there's a little bit more protection, ligaments, tendons, bones, right? So he can handle the workload. And if you're throwing all the time, your upper back is the brake system to stop your arm from throwing. Well, okay, you're going to throw all the time? Then make sure he has a big, strong back. Not so he's a great thrower, just so you can protect him from the repetitive use injury. So maybe don't go to every practice. Go to a few less practices, lift 3 days a week, still come to your practices and then your games, but do it that way, and you got a better shot. Because, like you said, at our age, when we were younger, the big separator was you play either rec league or CYO league, and then you qualify for travel all-stars, which gave you another 30 or 45, maybe 60 days of playing in your sport. So maybe you have a 3-month season and you get an extra 1 or 2 months. So those extra 1 or 2 months help separate you from everybody else. So then you get to play in high school, then you're playing varsity, then you're playing in college. Well, now if everyone's playing, the quality of the travel sports is diluted, and it's still just 7% of athletes from high school go on to college and 2% go on to D1. The playing that many extra games is no longer the separator. The separator now is that no one would train and lift. So if you just add in that 3 times a week with people that know what they're doing, then okay, now you have a separator. All right, everyone knows who the strongest kid is on the team. Everyone knows who the fastest kid is on the team. You might not be there, but build yourself towards there, one, to keep yourself safe, and then also give yourself a shot.
I think that's an excellent point, Jim. I really do. I think we've spent the last 20 years understanding the injury mechanisms of these high volume loads on kids and things like that. And the next stage is really, okay, if your kid's going to be a professional athlete, and if you're playing a sport 10 months out of the year, you're a professional athlete, whether you're being paid or not.
Right.
You need to start treating yourself like a professional athlete. Your nutrition needs to be on point. Your rehab needs to be on point. Your lifting, you need to be with a trainer, not only in performance in your sport, but just in body performance. So I agree with you wholeheartedly, because we're not going to stop this. We're not going to stop these families and kids and parents from playing. So
that's fine. Let's just find a way to work with them and tweak it a little bit. So those kids that don't have the edge, let's give them the edge.
Agree completely. And then take injuries seriously. I mean, these kids are under some major chaotic loads. I got introduced to wrestling in the last 2 years through my son. And oh my gosh, the things these kids do to each other in a wrestling match is unreal. So, we talk about recovery and proper conditioning. So yeah, I agree with your comment. Yeah, that if we're going to treat kids at that level of sports, they need to be treated at that level of sports, including rehab, exercise, and nutrition.
Yeah, just equip them so they can handle it. You'll even watch like the college and pro football teams now, like in training camp, they put that extra padding on top of the helmet. They see what the sport does. They see what kind of damage it does. Here's another method to help protect you. Well, if you're going to be, playing softball all year long, what does the sport do to you? You wear a helmet, right? You wear cleats. Protect your body so you give yourself a shot just at the longevity. Because when other people get hurt, they just keep regressing. So if you can just stay injury free, you're going to have an edge. Then give yourself the edge on being the strongest, fastest, most powerful person on the team.
Agree completely.
Any other thoughts you want to share with us before I go through my rapid fire fun questions?
Rapid fire? Oh, not really. I think we got through most of it. It was fun.
It was a good time. What's if you're lifting and training, tell me something that you like to listen to, or do you listen to anything at all?
I tend to listen to motivational podcasts, and if I'm not, I try to go with silence.
Silence is getting in your head.
Yeah, and I got a good story behind that, but I know these are rapid fire.
All right, we'll come back to that. So, bucket list adventure you haven't done yet.
Oh man, I thought about that one. I need to get behind the wheel of a Ferrari before I die. I think that's a big bucket list.
See how fast you can take it.
Yep. Get on a track or something.
All right, favorite sports movie?
I wrote down Miracle or Remember the Titans.
Both Disney classics.
Yep.
Favorite sport to watch?
Basketball and UFC right now. I love watching UFC. Fighting is so primitive. It's
right.
I love it.
Favorite athlete to watch?
Actually, Khabib, and I can't pronounce his last name. It's Nurmagomedov or something like that, but he's a Russian UFC fighter. And man, you talk about a dedicated, intense guy, not only to his religion and his sport, but just to life in general. I like listening and watching him.
Favorite book that's geared towards sports?
Geared towards sports? Oh man, I didn't write a sports book down.
Curveball.
I got one for you on that.
Favorite book in general?
I read the Bible every morning. I just got done with Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. I love that one.
Yep.
And then when I need the mind candy, give me knights, wizards, battlefields, swords,
D&D.
dragons. Give me all that stuff.
All right. Favorite superhero?
Captain America.
Favorite villain?
Either the Joker or Thanos.
Favorite lift to do?
If I can't think of anything else to do, I'm grabbing a kettlebell in the gym.
All right.
I love kettlebell swings. I love kettlebell presses. Those kinds of things.
Let's see. If you had 10 million, what kind of job would you be doing?
I truly believe I do the job I'm doing, but in a different way.
Gotcha. And then favorite quote?
My favorite quote is, "I'm constantly amazed with how much I don't know."
I don't know. Socrates? I'm not sure.
No, that's from Wizard Zorander from the first Wizard's First Rule.
Way off.
Way off.
And then so circle back.
That stuck with me my whole life.
So circling back, you said you like to train in silence. Mm-hmm. Was that, I can't remember, was there an Eastern Bloc training story that you had for me way back in the day about they're respecting the barbell?
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Remind me how that goes.
I got to go to Connecticut at a Stuart McGill event, and he had Pavel Tutsolini there. Are you familiar with him?
Not a lot, no. Mm-mm.
Okay, Pavel, who is who brought the Russian kettlebell to the United States.
Okay.
And he developed all the exercises and things behind that.
All right.
And we went into this Eastern Bloc style gym, and it was all muted colors, blacks, grays, off-whites. There was no music. Lights were dim. And I'm like, okay. And then they sat us down and talked to us about neural priming, and it was all neurology with them with lifting. You want 100% focus on the bar. We talked about a lot of breathing. We talked about the mindset of murdering the bar when we approached it. This is the mindset you lift with, and to have a distraction like music in your head is not the way to do it. And so we were lectured on that for a good 2 hours before we ever hit the gym floor. And once we hit the gym floor, I made the mistake of taking a barbell and moving it out of my way with my foot.
Disrespectful.
Pavel Tuzzolini got right up in my face and said, because you're a newcomer here, I'm going to give you a warning. But if you ever disrespect the bar again by placing your foot on it, I will kick you out and you'll never be welcome back. And I was just like, dang. Okay, that's where we're at. Right. This is the seriousness that these guys take it. It is neurology with them. When you see an Eastern Bloc athlete warming up, they're breathing, they're slapping each other in the chest, they're priming all their neurology to get up, and then they're shaking, and then they go do their thing.
Right.
They're priming. They're not stretching. They're not slowing themselves down. They're not breathing and rolling their neck and head around. They're getting ready to create some violence. Is the term they use a lot. When you approach the bar, you're getting ready to do some violence.
Because they're going to work up to a load that's so intense that mistakes can be quite costly.
Oh, sure.
Right? Out of position, not paying attention. Next thing you know, you're going to see your back guy. Right? So that's how they take that. That's not for most people, but those that really
I would say those mistakes are less, though.
Sure.
Because
they're focused.
Most people hurt themselves picking up a pencil than picking up a boulder.
I've hurt my back picking my car keys up.
Yep.
Off the ground. I've done
and
that.
It's because when you go to pick up the boulder, you prep your body to pick up the boulder. You get tight. You start to lock in your breathing. You prep your mind. Hey, I've got to push this force forward. And when you pick up the pencil, it's all nonchalant. You don't care. You bend over, and then you have an energy leak that L5 tilts, and now you have a disc injury, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So it's rarely the intense lift where people hurt themselves.
Yep.
It's as they fatigue or their nonchalant movement patterns, they get an energy leak. So
awesome. Well, I think we'll end with that, man. Josh, thanks so much for taking the time and sharing with us today. Learned a lot of great things about the importance of recovery, and then some reaffirmations, and then some things about how to do it with Stuart McGill's Big Three and whatnot, and which books to read. So, hey, Josh, really appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Jim. Nice. I had a lot of fun.
I'll see you soon. Take care.
All right, see you.
Bye.